Welcome back to the Barrels Talk Podcast. We are back with another episode of Let's Talk About It, continuing our series of doing a deep dive into every single NBA team before this upcoming season. Now we have the Pelicans on this list now. So looking at the Pelicans, is an interesting team. Made a big-time move in getting DeJounte Murray this offseason. You draft Yves Missi to be kind of your starting center at this point because they haven't really addressed the center position so far this offseason. They brought in Daniel Theis as a backup, but other than that, they have not done anything with the center position, which I think is low-key something that is going to work in their favor. I'll get to it when I talk about kind of their potential starting five. But looking at this team, you lose in the first round of the playoffs to the Oklahoma City Thunders. They were just outmatched. You don't have Zion. He gets injured in the playing game against the Lakers. Then without Zion, you go and beat the Sacramento Kings on the road to secure the 8th seed in the playoffs, but then you're outmatched against the Oklahoma City Thunder. So looking at this, it's definitely an interesting offseason. You had a lot of the Brandon Ingram trade rumors, which have kind of calmed down, have kind of started to pick back up with the Utah Jazz extending Lauri Markkanen, and now they have pivoted and being interested in Brandon Ingram or potential Brandon Ingram plus something else from the Utah Jazz for like a Walker Kessler. That could be very interesting because the Utah Jazz have a ton of assets, and the Pelicans are kind of in a desperate need for a center like a Walker Kessler to kind of pair with a Yves Missi as a backup. I feel like could be very interesting and intriguing. But looking at this, the offseason has been really good. I think DeJounte Murray is a very good move, especially for what you gave up for him. You got to think of this move as what you gave up in Dyson Daniels and Larry Nance. And I want to say it was some draft capital. It's happened a while ago now. So I want to say there was some draft capital involved. So you got to think of what the Atlanta Hawks gave up to get DeJounte Murray in general, which was a ton of draft capital. You're kind of getting him for low-key pennies on the dollar for kind of the talent that he is to pair a backcourt with him and CJ McCollum up. And now it's going to be different because DeJounte Murray is back in his primary position at the point guard spot, where when Trae Young was hurt, DeJounte Murray was playing really good basketball. Now you have CJ McCollum back in his original position at the 2, which I think that's where he plays his best basketball. So I love that backcourt. And it's not like you have a small backcourt when looking at this, thinking of like CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard days where there was a small backcourt. Now you have DeJounte Murray at your 1, who's 6'4", 6'5", CJ McCollum at your 2. I like that backcourt a lot. Then you have a defensive presence and Herb Jones going into the potential starting 5. I think it's going to be DeJounte Murray, CJ McCollum, Herb Jones at your 3. And I'm just having the mindset of Brandon Ingram still being on this roster, which I think he will by the time the season starts. He's kind of in a big-time prove-a-year, got to be healthy to kind of get the money that he is wanting. So looking at this, I think Brandon Ingram is at your 4. And with the lack of center play on this team, I don't know if Yves Missi is kind of ready to be like that starting caliber center. He could be a phenomenal backup working his way towards being a starter. But at this point in time, I think the starting 5 should be DeJounte Murray at your 1, CJ McCollum at your 2, Herb Jones at your 3, Brandon Ingram at your 4, and then Zion Williamson at your 5, running more of like a point center Zion in a way, to where I think we saw a lot of how that looked in the Lakers game, where in that Lakers playing game, Zion was dominant, and then Jonas Valanciunas kind of got played his way off the court. And then looking at that, Zion was just getting downhill with all that spacing and all those shooters around him. He was really being dominant. And some of the best, actually some of the best versions of Zion I've seen in his NBA career was in that game. This is what that game solidifies what we think Zion is at his peak, is somebody that can get to the rim, be a dominant force, and be able to play make when needed. I feel like he is perfectly suited, especially this year, to experiment more with him playing at the 5. Looking at this, I think they still have the depth to make something happen. I still like Daniel Theis as a backup. I think Yves Missi as a backup is suitable for sure for more size. I do think they're going to definitely need to pivot and go grab a center off the market at some point. But looking at this, you still have Trey Murphy. You still have Alvarado off your bench. Like, you have depth at all the positions. You still have Jordan Hawkins, who in his rookie year was great shooting the 3-ball in stretches, but he just couldn't find his way onto the court due to how many guys that the Pelicans do have. They are a very deep team. But now looking at this, I think they have one of the more talented starting 5s in all of basketball. It's just depending on how the fit works. If you do experiment with Zion at the 5, I think it could allow you to really get a lot of interesting different lineup looks. And I think you have the spacing to make it work. Herb Jones has been working on the 3-point shot. He's gotten better every year. You know what Trey Murphy gives you off the bench. CJ McCollum is obviously a knockdown three-point shooter. DeJounte Murray can space the floor. Like Brandon Ingram still space the floor. Like you have the options to experiment with Zion at the small ball 5, which I think it could become a big matchup problem for a lot of different teams out west. Like when you think about this team, if they're healthy, matching up with having Zion, having this lineup in, think about them against like the Denver Nuggets, for example. Then if you run this lineup, yes, you're giving up size to Jokic defensively, but offensively, you are really putting a ton of pressure on a team like Denver. Now you're forcing Zion, if that's the matchup of Jokic versus Zion, then Zion can go to work. Even if you don't have, and they have Aaron Gordon on Zion, for example, at that point center role, then like who is Jokic guarding? Then that's a matchup problem for a lot of different teams. And I think this Pelicans team, if they do experiment with Zion at the 5 in certain cases, I think it could really work out for them, because I think Zion is that good. I think Zion getting downhill that's when he's at his best. I love him playing more of a point center. I've seen cases where like people like him at the small forward at times, just experimenting him because he has a different kind of style of play. But I think him at the point center, I think that could cause a lot of different matchup problems for a lot of different teams. And then offensively, I think this team could take another jump and another leap with him at that position. But there is talks about, it came out like yesterday because Lauri Markkanen is expected to sign the extension. Now the Jazz are kind of pivoting and making different moves. So if they were to add a Walker Kessler, I am perfectly fine with that. I would still like to see them go the route of Yves Missi, because I think athletically, Zion and Yves Missi could cause a lot of problems in that front court. But looking at the X factor, it's Zion Williamson. I want to say it's Brandon Ingram, but with the way Zion was playing towards the back half of the year, he is just a difference maker. He is the X factor for this team. When he is healthy and when he is 100% getting after it, this team is completely different. Like when you get that back half of the year Zion last year on this team with a fully healthy roster, this Pelicans team is very dangerous. I think he's easily the X factor for this team because he's the biggest difference maker on this team and their outlook. When you see Zion Williamson healthy and ready to go, this is what makes the Pelicans a real top team that's very dangerous and sneaky in this Western Conference with what they have. In terms of expectations, if they're healthy, I think this team could realistically be at the top of the Western Conference. I think they are that good and that talented. It all comes down to the health, and that's kind of the main question I have for the Pelicans team as a whole. Can this team stay healthy? That has been the question for the past couple of seasons. 1 year Brandon Ingram's hurt, the next Zion Williamson is hurt, and then you have flip cases of Brandon Ingram against the Phoenix Suns a couple years ago in the playoffs, was really getting after and going off. Then you have Zion, before he gets hurt, he's going off in the plan. So like, if this team can stay healthy, I do think this can be a top 5 unit out west with how talented the West is. That's how good I think this team fits together now. And it's going to be very interesting to see. I think the only thing that they're lacking is maybe another big to have in that rotation. Just another big body, because say you don't run Zion at the point center, say you have him at the 4, then it's like interesting to who starts at that 5. I think you need just one more person with some depth. Maybe they can go possibly grab somebody with a little bit more shooting, because now you can really experiment with somebody that can space the floor. I know Jonas Valanciunas can space the floor, but I feel like Jonas Valanciunas athletically is just getting himself played off the court at times in terms of the switchability and things like that. So looking at that, I think it's going to be very interesting to see what way they do pivot and go and get a center. But the main question I have is, can this team stay healthy? If they can't stay healthy, it's kind of going to be the same year for the Pelicans, another team that has all the talent in the world, but a disappointing end to the season because either one of their 2 stars were not healthy come playoff time. So I think it's going to be a very interesting season for the New Orleans Pelicans. And looking at this team, I'm not going to be surprised if they're a top 5 to 4 team out west if they're healthy. I think this team is that good and sneaky and talented. But that is all I have for this episode of the Barrel Talk Podcast. Hope you tune in to future episodes.